You write that navigating the path toward a low-carbon future in the era of Trump then means giving ordinary people a stake in climate policy and making it about much more than science. That's exactly what the organization People's Action hopes to do. You also write that how People's Action is rooted in Saul Alinsky-style community organizing. The national organization has in recent years adopted climate change and the environment as central issues alongside local and state efforts to beat back austerity. Making these two fights one and the same has led to the group's greatest successes, says Jordan Estevao, one of its senior strategists. How much does single-issue advocacy then undermine the ability to challenge the Trump administration? How much do you think a shortcoming on the left or even of the Democratic Party has been the inability or unwillingness to connect issues together, to stress and even exploit, if you will, the connections between things like the environment, racism, and poverty for a more holistic or even intersectional approach to politics and organizing? To you, what explains why these links seemingly have not been made in the past?
Yeah, I think something important to bring up here is that there are, parts of the environmental movement very broadly which have been making these connections for many years. So environmental justice fights, most of them in communities of color and working class communities who are dealing with the toxic impacts of the extractive industry, make these connections, really organically because they're not abstract. But I think here, I'm sort of talking about a very specific set of, very large green organizations, things like the Environmental Defense Fund, which have not had a historic connection to grassroots fights and to any idea that the fight against climate change could be intersectional, that it could be something which gives working people a stake, and this has been disastrous, I think, for the climate fight. We see things like cap and trade, which is a policy that has virtually no impact on working people's lives. No reason for any person off the street who has not, probably doesn't have an MPA or something. It's very hard to get people to care about it because there's almost no connection to, trying to put food on the table, to trying to put a roof over your head, or bring down your rent or whatever. And fights like the one People's Action are fighting are really interesting. I think an interesting model for what it looks like to have a really intersectional and thoroughly solidaristic climate movement, which is that everybody kind of wants to bring down their power bill, and that's something that's an inordinate burden for poor folks. The poorer you are, the larger percentage of your income that you pay to just keep the lights on, and so fights like that and kind of refocus the central point of the climate movement away from how do we keep less gases in the air, how do we make a global agreement, to how do we bring down your electricity bill, how do we make your communities safer to live in, and make sure that you can drink your water. I think it's a really hopeful kind of reframe about what constitutes the climate fight. And it's not that all those other things aren't true. It's not that we don't need to bring down emissions. It's not that we don't need to stay in things like the Paris Agreement. But having that be the singular focus of what we talk about when we talk about climate change, I think is really politically dangerous and leaves out a whole lot of people who I think could be really powerful members of this fight. And are very needed members of this fight. And in order to get people involved, you have to give them a stake in it. And it's much easier to have a stake in bringing down your electricity bill than in making sure a global agreement gets passed.
You write this new approach to fighting climate change might look something like the political revolution underway in Nebraska, where pipeline fighters and Sanders Democrats, Bernie Sanders supporting Democrats, have taken control of their state Democratic Party. Thanks to Sanders' win in the state's Democratic caucus in March, his supporters made up the majority of delegates to the party's June convention. These delegates helped vote a state of progressive reformers into the party's top positions. And then you add later on that this kind of bottom-up, movement-driven politics taking root on Nebraska ranches and California oil fields is antithetical to the way the current Democratic establishment operates. But if the party hopes to stop it slide into oblivion and pose a real challenge to Trump's right-wing populism, it will have to take its cues from local leaders who are trying a different way of doing things. How is this opposite to the way the Democratic Party currently operates? How would Democrats rather these people be organizing other than what you see taking place in Nebraska and California and with groups like People's Action?
Well, the Democratic Party of the last 20 years would just rather these people not be organizing, I think. The Democratic strategy, which came to a kind of disastrous end and then, showed itself as a failure on November 8th, has been to target increasingly small numbers of people. And so to go after really safe demographics in strategical locations and, create algorithms which say you don't need to go to Pennsylvania, you don't need to go to Wisconsin, because, the strategic fight, as the Democratic Party saw it, was contesting for these very small groups of people rather than have anything like a 50-state strategy, anything, that had any kind of tone, even populism or intonation of connection to working people. The Democratic Party has assumed that people of color, that working class people would come to their side because the Republicans were so horrible, that Donald Trump in this election was so horrible, and just sort of banked on the fact that the opponent was so ugly, which they are, of course, to win votes, and it didn't work. It simply didn't work. And I think what's happening in Nebraska is that there's a new crop of Democratic leadership sort of coming up. You see this, I think in people like Ian Cloud, but also folks like Keith Ellison, folks like Bernie Sanders, and I think a lot of leaders who maybe are not running yet, but who are instead leading social movements, who are out in the streets, fighting in movements like Occupy and the movement for Black Lives, the immigrant rights movement, who are really the leadership that the Democratic Party really needs, and the energy of the base is with people like Bernie Sanders, is with this sort of anti-establishment message that the Democrats seem totally incapable of ingesting. And of even acknowledging. There's a clip with Nancy Pelosi responding to an NYU sophomore who asked, can the Democrats move left economically? And her answer was, we're capitalists. This is what we do, and shows this real sort of divide between what the actual future of the Democratic Party is if it wants to survive, and what the Democrats are doing right now. And the leadership is, I think, incapable of doing their jobs of the Democratic Party. And so I think we do need this kind of low carbon, multiracial populism that can, inject the Democratic Party with a winning spirit, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's the right thing to have young folks and people of color kind of leading the party, but because it's the strategic thing to do as well. And